at a period of time when maybe the country needed that, they needed escape. That's when the Western recreated at an earlier time, hopefully in our memories of a more romantic and exciting time. Well, because in a way it wasn't a Western, it was an Eastern. It took place in Kentucky, you know, and we didn't have, well, we did have Indians, of course, plenty of them. In fact, I was one of them. But we had a lot of British soldiers and George Washington, and it's more of an Eastern orientation rather than the Wild West. So that was different. And, you know, Fess Parker, of course, who played Daniel Boone, had previously played Davy Crockett. So the character was very similar, and they remembered that character of Davy Crockett. It was transferred to Daniel Boone. He just changed the coonskin cap a little bit. Well, kids loved it. I mean, kids love cowboys and Indians, or colonists and Indians. Kids love that era. It's not only kids, let's face it, I mean, grown-ups as well. It's part of the American culture, part of the whole background of America. And it's very romantic. You know, the woods, running through the woods. Oh boy, did we run through the woods. We did a lot of running. It was very picturesque to look at, and the Indians were colorful, and the red coats were colorful, and our costumes and our behavior was fun. We had it was a fun show too. There was a lot of humor, a lot of camaraderie between Fess and myself in particular, and some of the other members of the cast. And so there was that kind of wonderful adventuresome that kids love that. And really and truly, so I do myself. I think I saw a movie, I saw Dances with Wolves, I think 20 times. I just love the movie. It's a very well-made picture, but that thing about that period is intriguing, and we had that going for us. Absolutely, it was a family show. Well, consider we had Daniel Boone, and then we had his wife Rebecca, portrayed by Patricia Blair. And then we had the little boy, and we had the little girl, and you have the best friend, you know, that was myself. So it was a very strong family show. And besides which, we operated in Boonesboro, which was a small little village, basically. So all the other people, so there was a very close-knit cast. And family was big. Many of our episodes dealt with the little boy and the daughter and the scrapes they got themselves into, and the feeling of the colonial times, which is very intriguing, I thought. I mean, we had characters like, a lot of characters from history. We had Boettcher, for example, the guy, played by Maurice Evans, a very fine British actor. Boettcher was the guy that wrote operas and everything, and he did come to the United States, and he did support the colonies. And George Washington was in a couple of our episodes, as well as other figures of the period. And we had many different episodes that dealt with problems of that time, which also resonated with our times, even, you know, that the thing was going on, that the show was being shown. A Cherokee, half Cherokee. My mother was a Cherokee. My father was the Lord Governor of Virginia, played by Walter Pidgeon, the great, wonderful actor. He played my father. And he was the governor, so I was a sort of a mixed blood. I was educated to begin. I didn't say ugh a lot, you know. In fact, on one episode, I played the part of that character, and I pretended to be a dumb, uneducated person. But yes, that was very important. As a matter of fact, I became a kind of an advocate of Indian problems. I represented some of the Indian tribes on television, and they do have problems, as you know, even today. There are a lot of poverty and a lot of difficulty that they've never, you know, quite entered into the modern times. I'm talking about some of the people out on the reservations. So I think all in all, the show did represent the Indians, and even our foes on the show, our enemies, were were rather intelligent and capable people. Well, I probably just changed it, that's all. Yes, I mean, I did feel like I owned that character. I did a lot of research before. Very interesting, by the way. I looked at a lot of old photographs. Well, they weren't so well. Some of them were photographs, and some were paintings of people of that Indians of that time, Native Americans, I guess I should say. But and I found that there were particularly in the southern forest tribes. In fact, all the forest Indians. Some of them were very tall and fair-skinned, and I was very surprised to hear that. And I saw a bunch of guys that looked a little like me. I mean, you know, we very often are exposed to the Plains Indians, who were more like the Japanese or people like that. They were rather short and stout in stature. But the Indians that we were portraying, you know, were big, tall, strong guys. Nowadays, by the way, the chances are, and rightfully so, they probably would have got a very good Indian actor to play that part. But in those days, they didn't do that. They used, you know, Caucasian guys to play Indians. Not that I'm complaining. I was very happy to have the job, but it was fun doing it. I enjoyed it, and I did understand the character and tried to have as much fun with it and as much demonstrate to the Indians that their heritage was more than just ignorance and savagery. Well, I think it was beginning to make itself felt all throughout television and even in the westerns. You know, the real cowboys. Those things were starting to appear. Yeah, the times were reflected, I think, to a certain degree. Although we did try to go back to history and make it more of an adventure story. You know, we didn't want to people watch television for escape for the most part, at least those kind of shows. And, but they did make themselves felt to a certain degree. I think you're right about that. Well, I have to say something. I think Fess Parker is one of the finest people I've ever known, and kindest people I've ever known. I've almost never heard him say a bad word about anybody. He was gentle, is gentle, and that emerged. People saw that. That's the thing about television. They really do see through the camera. I mean, they think a lot of people who make it in television make it because their intrinsic attractiveness comes through, personalities. And he is that guy. He talks that way. Fess is from Texas. He's a little bit of a slow talker. He has that humor, that Texan humor, and that was very much evident in his character. And the nice part of it was we were and still are very close friends, and there was a kind of a chemistry that went on there. You know, the two pals. You know, when we had comedy lines or fun things to do with each other. In fact, there was always that bit of bravado that you always get, very often get in television in times of danger, you know, that kind of stressful humor. The humor comes out of stress. And we were always joshing each other and making fun of each other in character, but we also did it off camera as well. And it got onto the screen, I think, as well. Not only was he thinking, he was doing. He was beginning to get into the field of, very successfully into the field of real estate, particularly in Central California. And he built a hotel and then another place. And he has a lot of successful businesses. He has a winery there, a major winery. The Fess Parker Winery is very, very successful. And he has a big resort hotel in Santa Barbara on the beach, and he's building another one right beside it. And I mean, he is very, very successful. And was then. He was working on those things, I mean, very often he didn't sit around having coffee between scenes. He was meeting with business associates. So you know, you don't get that kind of success without putting in the work. That was the biggest international introduction of television to the world, that show. Fess went around the world with that, you know, making appearances and everything. And people often think that, or do think that that it was a series. It wasn't. They only made, I believe they made 3 one-hour shows, or maybe hour-and-a-half shows. And they played them over and over again, and they were tremendously successful for the reasons that we were talking about the Daniel Boone show in a way, that kind of that adventure story that being brought onto the screen was in a different way than the Westerns and the traditional cowboys and horses and buffalo and all the rest of it. So yes, it was an enormous, and it did make a fortune for Disney and made the studio very prominent. That one show was very much so. But an interesting thing about that, I guess he was a sheriff or a marshal. He had a very strong speech impediment. It was one of those things that he stuttered terribly. But the minute he got on camera, he read his lines perfectly. It's some kind of a psychological thing. You know, I mean, you never would, in a million years, you would never have known that he had a speech impediment off screen. But yes, that was one of my very first, maybe my first big show out on, you know, that kind of show, action show on television. And Chuck Connors was wonderful. He was wonderful to work with. Big, rugged guy, and he was very helpful to me in ways because he was showing me little tricks, you know, that I would not have done on stage, for example, which is what my background was. But visual things that you do on camera, that he was very helpful, and it was a fun show to do. It was bad though. I was a bad guy. I was mean. I remember that there was a girl involved, and I had her kind of cornered somewhere, and she tried to walk by me. So my instinct was to just move in front of her and stop her. But Chuck took that big 6'5" leg of hers, and he stuck it out and barred her. Well, visually, that was very interesting. So I borrowed it. He lent it to me. Bonanza, of course. That was another version of a family show. In this case, it was the brothers, and it was a different part of the country. That was the Sierra Mountains. You know, the mountains up around. I think they shot it in, not around Reno, but somewhere in the mountains, and they too had, as we did. There was always a kind of a little morality play going on there too. I guess I didn't mention that, but that was part of the picture, that we tried to have a moral point to make, and they did too, but in a different way. They were a lot more violent because, you know, there were a lot of gunplay and everything. We were trying to shoot our flintlock rifles, which were terrible. You pull the trigger, and this was the way those flintlocks really worked. You'd pull the trigger, and there'd be silence, and all of a sudden, boom, it would go, the pan would catch on, and it would shoot. So, but, you know, it was a lot slicker for their kind, and there were a lot more horses and so forth. I'm trying to think of some of the other major Westerns at that time.
Well, like a Gunsmoke, or, you know.
Yeah, Gunsmoke is another one. And a morality play, if you come right on down to it, almost every time. There was always a moral point to be made. And that maybe was the longest running, I think, one of the longest running television shows ever, and I think by far the longest running Western. Part of it was Big Jim Arness. That man was as big as a tree. I mean, he was huge. I mean, I'm a fairly tall fellow, but I felt like he was about 6'7" or something like that. And on screen, that huge power manifested itself, and it was a very popular show. Well, they didn't use a lot of, they used them as extras and everything. There were very few Native Americans that they used as characters. They generally, you got these blue-eyed people playing the part of, including the women, you know, you get these beautiful Caucasian girls, and they would put dark makeup on and put a black wig, and they were supposed to be Indians, but no, as a matter of fact, I thought that that playing an Indian was by no means, for me, any kind of a come down. It was just another role, and they gave me a lot of freedom, so that I had a lot of humor, and there were a lot of episodes that were very funny. I mean, really almost a little slapstick, and they were very serious moments. I remember once I played a double role where I played Mingo, my character, and mean brother, twin brother, came out of the woods. So I played both parts. And no, there was a lot of fun to it. And there was a lot of breadth and seriousness in some parts as well.
Did you ever have a Native American come up to you and say, "Hey, you did a great job. I appreciate
Oh,
you"?
all the time. That was a source of great pride to me. Yeah, and as I said, at one point I was sort of a spokesman for them, for the Native Americans and their problems. I'd go on television or write articles and so forth, because I mingled with them. There were a lot of extras, and I felt a certain obligation to Native Americans, representing them as a character on television. I felt a certain obligation to represent them in a positive way. Nope, that was a pure accident. When we did it, I never dreamed it would get on the air. I think in those days we shot it about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. This was back east. We shot that at the Carson show, and after we did it, I went home and I said, the funniest thing happened. You'll never see it because they're never going to show this. And I described what happened. Well, Johnny's brother Dick Carson was the director of the show. And they put their heads together and they put it on, and it broke kind of a little ground and a little opened up television a little more for slightly off-color, naughty things, although it was purely accidental. No, I really wasn't an expert at that. I'll tell you what Johnny Carson and I did a number of shows together where he would, because I was coming out of this character who was used all of, by the way, I had a bull whip, and I did become a sort of an expert at using the bull whip. But an Indian kid, a Navajo kid, taught me how to throw a lance. And Johnny happened to have been an expert archer. Johnny Carson was. So that's what led up to that whole thing. But in any case, we did a number of shows where I'd use various weapons on him. I even used South American bolas, those 3 balls in a string that they use in Argentina. I caught him with those, wrapped him around, and you can just imagine with Johnny Carson where it landed and what he did with it. I mean, it was hilarious. So he liked doing those weaponry things, and finally the show of Daniel Boone opened with a tomahawk splitting a tree, if you recall. So he asked me if I could do that, sort of reproduce that kind of look. And I said, well, sure, I'll do that. I went home and I practiced, and I really didn't. It really wasn't easy for me until one of the guys on the set, one of the prop men, said, I think what you need is a balanced axe. So he got, it was a roofing axe. It was a certain piece of work that they used. An instrument that they use, and he said, well, try this one. That was like throwing a baseball. I mean, you couldn't miss with it. When we went on the air, one of the Yahtzee guys, the crew, decided that it wouldn't be such a good idea to throw that tomahawk that way, because if it bounced off, it could hit somebody and maybe splinter. And so he taped it up so it wouldn't split and fly all over the place if it bounced off the target. Well, unbeknownst to anybody, including me, that changed the entire balance. All of a sudden, I didn't have a balanced axe. I had an unbalanced axe. It was like one of those crazy golf balls, that does that. And when I threw it like I always did. I threw my pitch right down shoulder height. And of course, that's not where it landed. By the way, that's the longest laugh in the history of television. It is. It's the longest laugh in the history of television. Well, we did. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of research went into it. We had an excellent costumer on the show, and he did a lot of research. I mean, he had books and books and books of Indian costumes over the time. Now, those particular tribes, as a matter of fact, the southeastern tribes, and from that, not only was I in a rather authentic costume, but also all the extras and all the other Indian-type people also, including the women. They were authentic. But I would say that that's probably true of Westerns in general as well. I think that even you know, the ones that dealt with the tribes out west and the cowboys and all that. Certainly a lot of it was romanticized, and a lot of the, in fact, there's a show on television now where a fella comes on from time to time and tells you what it was authentically like and how they differed, you know, how real, like, I guess the main thing was those shootouts, those nightly shootouts, you know, like knights in shining armor, and how they would stand and they would do those duels almost never. If you didn't like somebody, you went and shot him on the back. I mean, that kind of authenticity is there. But as far as the ambience, I think it was pretty accurate. That show was, in spite of the fact that it was an action-adventure series, there was very little killing actually went on. You know, we would sometimes have fisticuffs, or we'd bash somebody with somebody, but the next day they'd be walking around again, if you know what I mean. There was a certain, you know, we did shoot our flintlock rifles, but most of the times we missed, except for Daniel Boone, of course, he never missed. But no, there was not a great deal of violence, and on the show, we actually made it a point to keep the violence down as much as possible because we knew that children would be watching. I'm afraid that doesn't apply anymore. Now, if you turn on television, you see drugs and guns and killing and mayhem, and that's almost all you see, unfortunately, especially on the dramatic shows. So yes, there has been a drop in the cultural values, I think. Well, the Westerns really ran the show back then in terms of the breadth of types of shows that you would get to see. As I said a moment ago, nowadays you're seeing your heroes are gangsters, the Sopranos. But in those days, we hark back to an earlier time, which was a very romantic period in American history. And I think that whether it's because it was post-war and all of that, and we had a lot of problems in the world, and still did have problems. I believe the Cold War was on. People wanted, it was escape. People wanted to hark back to a wonderful time. Maybe it never really existed even, but at least romantically and in our imaginations that existed. The Western existed. I mean, the Western culture existed. And we had our heroes, you know, Gary Cooper played the taciturn, solo kind of a guy who never wound up with the girl, but always rode off into the sunset. All those legendary images were part of American culture and still are. They still are. A very good Western movie that's made today has those elements in it. So at a period of time when maybe the country needed that, they needed escape, that's when the Western recreated at an earlier time. Hopefully in our memories of a more romantic and exciting time.